Yeah, so that'll be after our first presentation. So for now, I'm going to hand over to Chandru from Extrupet, which runs one of the I believe the only bottle-to-bottle plant in South Africa. So we're very grateful to have you here with us today to talk about recycling for specifically PET and HDPE in South Africa. Over to you, Chandru.
Thank you, Tara. I appreciate it. Good morning to everyone. As always, appreciate the time and the opportunity. Boy, are we living the Chinese curse in terms of living in interesting times. And I think the danger therein is we lose focus on what are the pressing issues of our time. So I'm going to share with you today a different journey into sustainability. Different, why? Because I'm going to give it to you from a different perspective. And that perspective is from the coalface. Far too often, and it doesn't apply to sustainability alone, a lot of what we hear is theoretical. In many instances, sounds magnificent. But if you don't know what's happening at the coalface, I really wonder how it is that our solutions will align with the challenges we face. And I think Carl alluded to some of them, even for the likes of the Norwegians, who are blessed with wonderful financial wealth, but recognizing there are deeper rooted challenges in place. So just in terms of where we are from a South African perspective, this was last year, a report commissioned by Packaging South Africa. In all packaging material, in terms of what was collected for recycling, 1.8 million tons was recovered from the waste stream. How does that stack up against what was put out? Well, what was put out was 3.4 million tons. That's a recovery rate of 53%. I think that is incredibly admirable on a global scale. You'll hear statistics from the Greenpeaces and the WWF that only historically 9% of plastics have ever been recycled. I think they recently upped it to 12%. That's obviously a global average. So if we just take the plastic packaging figure for last year, for South Africa to be at 37%, boy, is that an admirable figure on a global standard. But the reality is there's still 63% out there, which is leaking into our landfills and sadly into our oceans. And we need to be mindful that that also needs a solution at the end of the day. But I think sometimes we don't acknowledge what we achieve on our front door, and it's important to do that. I think there are many European countries who don't achieve 37%. So yeah, credit where it's due. Obviously, what's worrying is the trend. So if we look at absolute numbers, 1.8 million tons recovered is great, but the year before it was close to 2.1 million tons. Why the drop? I guess the obvious drop, as was experienced globally, was because of COVID lockdowns. How does that stack up on a global, on a recent trend for us? Is the reality is, over the last 3 years, recycling has actually been going backwards. And a lot of that had to do with challenges before COVID. The economics of recycling was very challenged. Collection systems are very challenged. So as much as we laud the achievements of South Africa on a global scale, we've got to be mindful that we're probably not trending in the right direction. And why is that important? Because the reality is consumption is forecast to go up of packaging for obvious reasons. Populations are growing, wealth to a degree is also growing, and there's this big drive to return to business as usual, and that worries me, to be very honest with you. I think all of us in this room are probably suffering COVID fatigue and would just love to get back to business as usual. Well, guess what? Business as usual was broken from an environmental standpoint, a sustainable standpoint. And if we're not mindful about that, then we're not going to be able to track consumption trends. to not only keep up with our recovery rates, but actually grow it. Because if what we're not collecting as a percentage is more than 50% and what we're consuming is ticking upwards, then well done for recycling more. But the sad reality is what we're dumping and leaking into our oceans is also more. So we've got ambitious targets to grow recycling rates over the next 5 years, but that means we need another 500,000 tons of capacity to be able to recycle it in what are very challenging times. So let's be mindful of that. And also let's ask the question, is this enough in terms of what then we're not recycling and what I alluded to? So this is what we do. This is our feedstock at Extrupet. We're primarily recyclers of PET bottles. We also recycle HDPE bottles. This is what it looks like when we get it. The reality is on an African context and other parts of the world, we don't have sophisticated collection systems. So a lot of it is still informal. The benefits of that is it's a great job enabler. We've estimated that PET alone probably contributes to north of 50,000 job creation opportunities in South Africa alone, and really at sectors of society that are completely disenfranchised. But as has been rightfully tagged now, is how do we empower and uplift those sectors so they can become more meaningful benefactors in the waste hierarchy that we have. But that's what we collect. Traditionally, what we did with it is we took it and made a polyester fiber from it. A lot of it which went into non-woven applications like pillows and duvets, mattresses and carpets, and automotive applications. But a question that I'm quite often asked is, can we recycle ourselves to sustainability? Now, very pertinent. I don't know how many of you picked up the illustrious Prime Minister of the UK 2 days ago, who not only suggested that recycling doesn't work and can't save us, but also went on to say that to rebalance the imbalance of wild animals habiting the world versus domesticated animals, of which he included us, that maybe the solution was that we start feeding some of the humans to the animals. But I think for us, what resonated was this claim that recycling is broken and it doesn't work. We have a different view, but boy, did that capture the headlines. As much as feeding humans to the animals also captured its fair share of headlines. So what is sustainability? I think a lot of times when you ask the question, you'll get multiple definitions. But the Oxford English Dictionary describes this as a property of being environmentally sustainable, the degree to which a process or enterprise is able to be maintained or continued while avoiding the long-term depletion of natural resources. I think we're now getting to a realization that to be truly sustainable, there should be no depletion. We should somehow get to carbon neutrality. You will hear some really fancy terminology these days. Net zero, what does that really mean? But for me, sustainability is really putting back as much as we take out. And it can't be singular. We can't just focus on packaging. We've also got to be mindful of the product in packaging. And what are we now seeing? You know, the word itself has pretty much been hijacked and has led to a plethora of associated subjects. We now have sustainable cities, sustainable energy, sustainable food. What does that really mean? And it's now becoming more a personal view rather than a definition. And sadly, I think it's being misused in many contexts to push agendas to continue business as usual. So I think as you look as your individual products and you're looking at what is truly sustainable, I think more and more you've got to gear your personal view towards science and data and be holistic. Look at every element of the value chain to which you're looking at. And why is it important? For me, this is probably the singular metric that's driving everything. It's a topic that's very difficult to talk about. These are the estimates of where global population is going. We know we've crossed 7 billion. I think in the next few years, we'll hit 8 billion. Definitely by the time I'm checking out of this planet, if I've lived a full life, we're close to 10 billion people, all of who need to be clothed and fed and transported and housed. And that's putting a lot of pressure on the ecosystem. Why is it important to us? Over here is more than half of that growth between now and 2050 is expected to occur on this continent. So all of a sudden, we're seeing great market opportunities and great investments coming our way, but not, I think, being fully cognizant of the significant environmental costs that need to be considered. So if we're not mindful of what that population denominator does, then the reality is our solutions might work in the short term, but fail us in the long term. And the results could be potentially devastating, especially for a part of the world that is already resource challenged. For those of you who might have not seen this metric before, it's what's known as the Global Overshoot Day. It pretty much calculate, by when have we consumed what the world needs 1 year to cultivate. And back in 2019, I think the figure was July the 22nd, is by when the world had already consumed what it takes 1 year to make. South Africa hit that target July 8th. What does that mean? Is come July 9th here in South Africa, we were eating from the food stocks and resource stocks of future generations. So now you'll hear narrative about we already need 1.6 planets to sustain us if we continue to live as we currently are. And that's just obviously not sustainable. And boys are getting loud out there. We're now, the narrative, is shifting to some pretty hard graphics that the world is being hit with. This is kind of, especially from an ocean dynamic, which I think is very pertinent. This is what the world is starting to realize is the reality, but there's an inherent danger in that. I think everyone on this call might have read or know about this metric. By 2050, the oceans could have more plastic than fish. Well, guess what? A year or year and a half ago, they retracted the statement because they found out the metrics by which they used to calculate this were flawed. This is not the truth. This is not the reality. And what we're starting to see is mainstream media and those who have other agendas are pushing plastics to a space where the real danger is we're now seeing substitutes. For example, biodegradable this, compostable that sadly are doing more harm than good. So is all plastic good? No, it's not. But is all plastic bad? It's definitely not the case. Plastic evolved to what it is because it has the lowest carbon footprint. And in those instances where they need to be substituted out for something else, what we really need to be mindful of is to do the science, look at the data, and ask the question is, when we are substituting plastic out, are we actually doing more good than harm? And if all that we're going to do is subscribe to the narrative and the scaremongering, then we're already seeing examples of substitutes that do more harm than good. We've also got to be mindful that this is leading to a change in consumerism, and I think rightfully so. This is the conventional hierarchy of waste: reduce, reuse, recycle. The new one that's ridden into town is what we're starting to see, which is refuse. What that alludes to now is where, let me just go back up. Consumers are actually making mindful choices on products that where it's not demonstrated that brand owners are mindful of the packaging they use and it's not plastic centric, it applies to glass, aluminium, paper, then consumers are shunning those products. On the back of that now, already we have global players looking to increase their recycled content. Why is that important? Because if you increase the demand for recycled content, you automatically increase recovery rates and divert waste from landfill. Because ultimately the premise of all recycling is collect and do what? So if there isn't a demand for a product, You could be very good at collecting it, as Europe found out, but all that's going to happen is going to end up back in our landfills. And I think for us to push for more brand owners to be more forceful about their commitments and more ambitious, ultimately ensures that less products, and again, it's not plastic centric. It's not only plastic that's floating in the oceans. There's a lot of other products. I think the majority of plastic that floats in our oceans is actually fishing nets, not packaging. But we really need to hold brand owners accountable for their products. The good news in South Africa is we've already got products that are made from 100% recycled content. That's allowed us to increase recovery rates to ensure we divert more waste from landfill. This was our flagship release already 2 years ago, where with Coca-Cola, we did a project where we made a water bottle made 100% from a discarded bottle. This is also very important, is because obviously plastics are manufactured from fossil fuels. If we generate so much waste that's destined for our oceans, why can't we design our products to then become the next product and truly circular? And this is really important. It's not unique to plastics packaging. It applies to everything. Our electronic products generate a huge waste challenge for countries and waste management systems. What happens to your cell phones, your laptops, your fridges, your freezers? According to EU research, over 80% of all product-related environmental impacts can be influenced during the design phase. For us, that's a wonderful opportunity, and we really push this agenda. And thankfully, along with the work of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, who alerted us that it's not only about packaging, we have challenges also in the fast fashion industry. Why can't we solve these problems at the design phase? And as I alluded to, the societal pressure. And I really want to flag here the dates. This is nothing that most of us don't know already. Pre-cycling is a new buzzword that refers to the act of knowingly buying a product that can be easily disassembled or recycled at the end of its life. This came out 12 years ago. According to WRAP, a survey based in the UK, 86% of respondents felt it would be good if packaging contained recycled plastics. This came out 15 years ago. Why have we been so slow to act? So let's not cry over spilt milk. I think what I really want to highlight is time is running out. Let's not duplicate or replicate the sins of the past. It's really critical now that we tune in to what the new consumers are asking us for and be mindful of design. On the back of this now, even the fast fashion industry are kind of waking up to the challenges. Some of our bottles that are recycled get converted into products like this. And as wonderful as that might be, it's raised another very good topic for debate as well. What's going to happen to those pair of jeans at the end of life? So a lot of greenwashing in the recycling stroke fast fashion industry. It's great that we took products and made something else out of it. But if we're not mindful about what's going to happen to that product at end of life, then really all we did was just kick the can down the road. Many of you might have graduated recently. This is a project in the US where they took discarded bottles and made graduation gowns from it. The poster child of all things bad in plastics is the plastic bag. So we now make plastic bags in South Africa from recycled PET bottles. But over 20 countries did a life cycle analysis of shopping bags. And what was really interesting, the shopping bag that rated the best in terms of environmental impact was the reused plastic shopping bag. And that's your single-use plastic shopping bag, which was reused, which happens a lot in Africa. Something like a cotton tote bag, they calculated we would have to come back for 20 lives to give back the carbon that we took to use to make that carbon tote bag. So really looking at data and science and metrics about what goes into making a product against which we claim sustainability, only to find out we did more harm than good. And wow, we now got fishing nets being harvested from the oceans, and we're going to make sneakers from it. But when you ask the big brand owners, well, how many sneakers did you really make from this? And what percentage was that of overall sneakers? They're very hesitant to tell you. So these are, in my eyes, what are now referred to as pilot washing, as opposed to greenwashing, where we go and do these wonderful, sexy projects and get everyone, applauding the achievement, but really back on the farm, everything is rotten. And yeah, as I alluded to, the fast fashion industry very much in the spotlight now and on the radar on their carbon footprint. And not everything in that industry is clean. And I think they're being called out. Thankfully, now we have this awareness about the circular economy. It's really about rethinking how resources are managed, how products are designed to ensure that resources are kept in the system. If we're already depleting our resources by the middle of the year, then I think it's about time that we make sure that what we do use have secondary and third and fourth and multiple lives, so that we just don't keep on being linear and depleting and throwing away. And for those of you who haven't tuned in, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation is a wonderful place to gather information and be part, I think, of a very meaningful dialogue about being true to the sustainability agenda, as opposed to just greenwashing around it. As well as, I think, another burning issue, food waste. Overall, a third of food is never eaten. What does this allude to? As much as plastic packaging is developing a more and more negative impression in our minds, it contributes to the reduction of food waste. Does that mean that plastic packaging gets a get out of jail card? Absolutely not. Any plastic packaging that is so poorly designed to fail, I would be the first one to put my hand up and say ban it. But if we're not mindful about transitions we make away from plastic packaging, there's two dangers. One is that we substitute it with a product that has a higher carbon footprint. Glass and metal have a much higher footprint than plastic. But worse is we lead to more food waste. So we've really got to be mindful about doing the science properly to guide us in the right path. And yes, sometimes what comes out is, sorry, you shouldn't be made from plastic because your carbon footprint does more harm than good. But I guess what I'm trying to stress here is we've got to follow data. Let's not follow whims and narratives that are, kind of driven by perceptions which aren't true. And what are we starting to see? There's been a huge shift in packaging in our government legislation. Already back in 2007, the Environment Agency of the UN urged governments to use bans or tax plastics to restrict microplastic beads in cosmetics and take other actions. So this is a growing movement globally. I think on the back of where self-policing has probably failed us. You saw that while recycling levels are great in South Africa, what we're not recovering when you consider we're going to be consuming more and more really is alarming. So we have legislation in South Africa. I think a lot of it probably copy-pasted from European legislation. In summary, it talks about using economic instruments, which are like levies and taxes, to change behavior in all sectors of society. Now, on the one hand, this is a bit unnerving. Do we really want governments telling us how to change behavior? But as I'll conclude, really what's a fundamental challenge here is behavior. And what it talks about is looking at materials that cannot be recycled or difficult to recycle. And the size of the levy needs to be related directly to the environmental damage caused by an individual product. So these are stuff that's already legislated. It talks about the polluter pay principle, shifting responsibility away from the consumer to the producer, and ultimately asking the producer who influences the design of their product to look at the rethinking of product design. Because as I alluded to earlier, 80% of environmental damage can be influenced at product design. And in the meantime now, it's become law. So in South Africa on the 5th of May, the Minister of Environment, the Honorable Barbara Creasy, gazetted the Section 18 notices, which now redefines the polluter as the producer of the product. Who's the producer? Is the converter that made it, as well as the brand owner whose name is on the product. And this talks to extended producer responsibility. So in conclusion, sustainability is a moving target. It's here to stay. Embrace it. If it's not consumers pushing back, you're going to find governments are now getting involved, influencing that change of behavior. Design for recycling will be essential to mitigate government taxes and consumer pushback. We can recycle ourselves to sustainability. And I say that humbly because it's not the silver bullet solution, but we have to adopt this new order as an opportunity and our last chance. It's well and good we talk about it. It's well and good consumers push back. It's well and good governments get involved. But if we don't start redesigning all our products, and it's not just plastic packaging, the realities will look back and say it's not. And again, I think an important awareness that's coming up is, as much as we want to design for recycling, we've got to be mindful to recycle, to design for purpose. You know, there are people involved in this value chain, down in the low value chain, who are the hidden, you know, almost forgotten element. We've got to be sure that why we're doing it is really to be truly sustainable. We don't want sneakers made from fishing nets if all it does is solve 0.001% of the problem. We really got to have the purpose embedded into that design element. And ultimately, the challenge to us all is one around behavior. If we can't change behavior, the reality is government interventions, consumer pushbacks won't do it. And our actions are the real truth. This was a recent picture, you know, from the Glastonbury Music Festival. They cheered David Attenborough like a god, but as the crowds headed home, they left a squalid mess that makes a mockery of their eco-posturing. So if we don't do our bit, the sad reality is nothing is going to change. And this is the burning issue, the climate story. Plastic packaging is a small fraction of this. If we can't keep focus on the bigger issue, which is CO2 emissions, I think the last time we had these levels was 4 million years ago. And we weren't 8 billion people 4 million years ago. So if we can't keep focus on this big issue, that's the burning issue of the day, excuse the pun, then really fixing the plastic packaging story won't save us. And that's why recycling also plays a critical role, because what have we identified is recycling 1 ton of PET is a net saver of 1.5 tons of CO2. Why? Because we're not going back and digging out fossil fuels, which is probably the biggest challenge here on the climate side, and probably not Norway's biggest dilemma right now, because for all the financial wealth, if you're drowning or burning up, money can't really save you at the end of the day. Solutions to sustainability have to dial into the climate story. So is your sustainable solution carbon neutral, or hopefully a net saver of carbon at the end of the day? And again, going back to this metric, this is really where the pressures come. Populations globally are growing. Each one of us probably has the highest carbon footprint compared to anything else out there. You might have heard the dynamic that what's the best way to reduce your carbon footprint is actually to have one less child, because we are the cause of climate change. And I think the recent IPCC reports alluded to that. Climate change is now accepted as man-made. I'm sure we're all going to tune in to the COP that's starting on Monday next week. Sadly, no one's really holding out a lot of hope that there's going to be meaningful change. But if we're not part of that engagement and we're not part of that change that we want to see, then the reality is climate will go in the trajectory that it's going. And just out of curiosity, how did we do last year while we were on lockdown? So Global Overshoot Day in 2019, if you remember, was July the 22nd Last year, it moved out to August 22nd. Still not, we're still consuming more than the planet can generate in a year. But when we stopped for a second, boy, did the planet have a chance. Sadly, we recently got the number for 2021, and it went back to July, I believe, 29. So this whole thing about running back to the old normal, we all just want to get back to the way it was and business as usual, has now shown us, it puts us on a trajectory where we will not be able to habit this planet in the next 30, 40, 60, who knows? Yeah, I don't think we really want to be around to find out what that global warming means to us in terms of our everyday lives. So on that, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity. Happy to answer any questions if there are. And if you'd like to stay in touch, the best way is to follow me on Twitter. I really do subscribe to listening to the climate scientists, not the politicians, not the movie stars, and bless them for trying. But, I think listen to what the climate scientists are telling us. So Tara, thank you. Appreciate it. Carl as well. Over to you.
I think it's great to hear about the sort of current recycling stats, and also sort of whether or not recycling is a viable solution going forward. Yeah, I see there has been a question in the chat that is asking, I believe this is referring to when you mentioned the material the material fibers that PET is recycled into, which has a variety of uses, including some for cars. The question is, do you recycle the material from scrapped vehicles as well, or is it just packaging that you're making into automotive parts?
Very good question. Right now, it's only what we recycle from packaging to go into automotive parts. But again, in this whole drive of government interventions on mandatory extended producer responsibility, which I think David will talk about next when he's on, is now if you want to sell a car, especially in the EU, you are mandated that the components you use to make that car either have to have a purpose to make the next car, or have to in themselves be recyclable into the next product. So shifting the responsibility to the producer will now drive that change. So for example, if you look at the boot of your car, it's a gray-like carpet. That's what our fibers use to make. What we'll have to now engage in is to somehow have a system that at the end of life of that car, that carpet can come back, be recycled or repurposed to become the next product. Fast fashion is on the same trajectory. If you want to sell your garments in our country, then take responsible for them at end of life. And responsibility isn't just going and burning it somewhere. Design the garment so that it has an end of life use as well. So that's now, I think it's almost like the party is over. The applause has died down, that well done, you took a plastic bottle and you made it into a car component. Talk to us now about that car component. How did you design it that at its end of life, and it might be 10 years down the road, how was it designed that in 10 years time, it could become the next product? So a lot of time when people ask me, what can we do individually? It's push for policy change. Our problems are systemic. Our problems need systemic changes and solutions. So policy change is what's really driving that dialogue and is now resulting in solutions. Because if we don't hold producers accountable, then the reality is nothing changes. But great question. Thank you.
Thanks, Chandru. I see there have been a few other comments here in the chat that say amazing talk, really interesting, and thank you for that. There have been some other questions regarding the bottle plant. Can you maybe just expand a little bit on the statistics of that? So sort of what percentage of bottles are converted to bottles in, well, certainly a very circular system compared to some other recycling streams.
So yeah, I'll give you some stats. South Africa consumes about 220,000 tons of PET annually. It is estimated 70% of that, plus minus 150,000, goes into beverage bottles, plus minus. Our capacity to make food grade PET was just recently expanded to plus minus 32,000 tons. So if we were able to collect every bottle back, it means we would be able to hit a recycling rate of 20%. Now, the reality is you never collect everything that's back. Two challenges then. You've got to be mindful that you peak at maybe 50% recycled content back into a bottle. Plus, because we have very informal collection systems, a lot of our waste comes in very contaminated. You need secondary end uses like fiber, strapping, monofilament to be able to convert that too. So how you design your recycling solutions have to be very localized for your part. What do I mean by that? You know, Japan might get to 60, 70% recycled content in their bottle, but their systems are different. As we grow recovery and we are able to collect more and more out there, our plan is to add more capacity to be able to make more of this very specialized resin. You can't just put any rPET back into a bottle. It has to be food safe. It's very stringent on how you do that. But we're hoping that we'll be able to peak at 50% for South Africa. And that'll be world class. You know, I mean, we're already at 20%, as I said. There are many countries that probably haven't even reached double digit yet. But yeah, we can't just applaud ourselves for being at 20%. We need to get to minimum 50.
Thanks, Chandru. And then with regard, you touched on this briefly, but with regard to PET that can't be further recycled, so I think often punnets that fruit comes in, those kinds of things. Can you expand a bit on why those aren't recyclable? Because obviously PET is the sort of most recycled plastic, so it's just curious why some is more recyclable than others.
So hopefully I don't lose any friends over this. I don't have many left. We had a solution for recycling PET punnets 3 years ago. The reality at that time, industry didn't see the value of supporting it. Now, because Section 18 is law and mandates that punnets have to be recycled at a growing target over 5 years, we're now in an engagement that come January, next year, we will start the collection and recycling of PET punnets. So many times, you know, we hear narrative that's not true. And many times it's, well, there is no solution. Well, in that case, there's been a solution on the table for 3 years. Hopefully, if the industry come together and support it the way it needs to be supported, and it's now mandated, then, like I said, we will start recycling. However, there are some polymers that are designed so poorly that they never have a hope of being recycled. And the pushes and the work we're doing with the SA Plastics Pact, which is linked to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. So for those of you who aren't tuned in, please dial into the work of the SA Plastics Pact. They've just released their first list of the dirty dozen, as I call it, of products to phase out. And that's where sometimes we as the plastic packaging industry have to put our hands up and say, yeah, these products have no hope of being recycled. And worse still, it's compromising the ability to grow punnet recycling in PET. So some punnets are made from other polymers that are contaminating our stream, have no hope of being recycled in their own sense. And the push now is to phase those out. But hopefully by January next year, we'll be publicizing that we've started the recovery and recycling of PET punnets in South Africa.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Chandru. I don't see any other questions that have come through in the chat. If anyone does have any questions, you're welcome to either send those through, or if you have them at a later stage, I'm sure we can pass those on via email to Chandru. I'm just looking, I don't see any raised hands either. Yes, so next on our schedule was it was an EPR presentation by David Drew, but unfortunately that has had to have been cancelled today. So
oh no.
I'm sorry, yes. So instead we're going to have brief breakout rooms for the different teams. The groups will have a brief chance to meet now for the next I believe until 10 past when we're scheduled for a comfort break. So we're just going to move into the breakout rooms now. So if any participants need to still determine which group they'll be joining, you'll have an opportunity now to move between the groups. I see there is a hand up. Gideon, I'm sorry, I don't see your hand, but I see you sent through in the chat that your hand is raised. Would you like to unmute?
Yes, I think I am unmuted.
You are.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Chandru, for quite an eye-opening presentation. I am in Johannesburg, and I'm just wondering. I seem to observe that when you look at the setup in Johannesburg, and I guess it's the same with quite a number of cities, you see a bit of a working infrastructure in terms of collecting garbage and specifically plastics from the upmarket suburbs. But you don't see that in what we call the townships. So I've observed that if you had a chance to visit communities adjacent to where you have a lot of rivers adjacent to townships, you see a lot of pollution, plastic pollution, particularly paper bags, other plastic materials, bottles, and so on. And I'm wondering whether you have applied your mind to how the quantities of plastic pollution compare for those who live in townships to those who live in suburbs where there is a bit of an infrastructure. And related to that, I was just thinking about what you said about behavior and awareness. And this would refer to a certain class of our community in terms of levels of education, the way they live their lives, and so on and so on. I have observed that if you have a chance to move around, particularly the rivers, you would find out that there are heaps of pollution close to townships, in rivers in the townships. Then there are also a related factor, I think, that is linked to a lot of activity in these township communities that comes from religious communities. How would you, what would you say about this trend, and do you have any suggestions about the patterns that are emerging there?
Thanks, Gideon. Great question. Another wonderful marine biologist, daughter of South Africa, Dr. Judy Manlang, based in Durban. If you don't follow her, please do. She shared a study about the value of knowledge in environmental affairs. So the behavioral scientists, Gideon, went out and did a study that, when people don't know, can you blame them for throwing the bottle in the river? Probably not. But, if we took the effort to go educate people about how their behavior influences bad environmental habits, how valuable was that knowledge? And the numbers came back. It was 20%. So even when we tell people, and educate them about bad behavior leading to bad things for the environment, somehow it just doesn't resonate. And there's probably many reasons for it, because everyone has different thought processes when they make an action. What does that mean for me? It means for me is we've got to stop talking about this thing about waste management and recovery. And I have a very controversial view on beach cleanups. My view on beach cleanups is we shouldn't do them. Why? Because if all we do are beach cleanups, then all we will ever do are beach cleanups. I want to see the waste reaching people's front door for everybody to understand how their behavior contributes to the leaking in the rivers and the oceans and in landfill. That's why I'm a big supporter of policy change for mandatory extended producer responsibility. Because when you put the onus on the producer, what he has to do is design his product to have value that even in the townships, it will never be thrown away. Either it was designed to be reused, or it had so much value in it that somebody picked it up to take it for recycling. Now, I must tell you, in 20 years of recycling PET in South Africa, we've never paid as much as we're currently paying today. That item is worth its weight in gold almost. It's hot. It's a global phenomenon. Why? Because producers need it to put it back in their bottle. And for me, my big push is, as much as I would love to have resources to educate people on behavioral things that change, the science shows it doesn't change. Put the onus on the producer, make sure they embed value when they design that product, and then you'll find look, we'll never get to 100%. The reality, there'll always be some leakage in any system. Even glass and paper and aluminium, which apparently are, recyclable forever, don't hit 100%. Glass right now is below 20%. It's in a terrible state. But for me, that's the big push. Embed value into a product, whatever it is, and the reality is it'll get collected for recycling. So just my views on the way I see it. Hope that answered your question.
Thank you so much, Chandru, and thanks, Gideon, for the question. I don't see any other hands raised, but if I'm wrong, you're welcome to send a message in the chat. But thank you so much, Chandru. I'm not sure if you'll be sticking around for the rest of today's session. I believe not, but
apologies, I do have to leave. I'll stick around for 15, 20 minutes if that's okay, Tara, but then I have to go.
Sure, yeah, you're more than welcome to. But thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us this morning and talk about sort of sustainability, recycling, and circularity and extended producer responsibility. Covered a lot of topics in a brief session. So for now, we're going to move into the breakout rooms. For the group facilitators and for the participants, you're welcome to jump between the rooms and, go to the particular room, and for the participants to join the room that you're hoping to join for the group. For those who are not participants today, I know we have a few presenters and a few others who have joined us here today. You're welcome to either join one of the specific topics in the breakout rooms and perhaps sort of weigh in or provide suggestions. Otherwise, you're welcome to join us again once we reconvene. Thanks, everyone.